All right. Let's go ahead and get our meeting called to order here to the Sherwood City Council work session, 6:30 p.m. on May 21st, 2024. Welcome, everyone. We have everyone's here except Renee has an excused absence, and Doug Scott has an excused absence. All right. So first thing on the agenda for our work session, we have one item.
Sit first.
One item, first thing. Would you like to comment?
You imply that there were more than one and you say the first.
There's a lot on this.
And first and only.
Anyways,
And yeah, because we will take up the full 30 minutes, I am going to consume a couple minutes of just rambling
well, I
incoherently.
mean, you assume I might not want something on the agenda. Anyways, since we're already off to a good start. I'm missing something, but all right. Keith being Keith.
Open the bear.
Yes. So
The bear with the
tonight,
gray spot in the back of his head.
yes. Are you done? Do we need to censure you? Anyways, we have Ryan and Sebastian here to talk about the results of our charter review committee and the work they did. And as a reminder for everyone, we are required by our charter to do a review periodically. I think it's six years. 6 years. We're a touch early this time, but that's okay. Sometimes charter review committees have lots of stuff. Sometimes they just have a little bit of stuff. And I think we're on the little bit side this round. But Ryan's going to go through that with us today and see what the next council thinks the next steps are on these items. And again, for the public, we could decide we don't want to do them. We could take all of them at face value and send, write ballot measures and send it to the ballot, or we could say, no, we want to study this more, or do some more work around something before we move forward. So we have a lot of options here. Did I get that right?
I think you got it right, Mayor.
So anyways, so with that, Ryan, Sebastian, take it away.
Sure. So we had 3 charter review committee meetings, March the 21st, April the 23rd, and May the 15th. And they gave 3 recommendations for you to consider tonight. I'll walk through those quickly, and then I'm happy to address any questions. First recommendation is really a cleanup. The Working Government Ethics Commission has a rule with respect to elected officials in any public official, and that definition is broad, that says if you use a credit card on city travel or on government travel, you are not entitled to keep those mileage rewards or those points that you would normally get. And that has caused consternation across the state. And one of the ways that the Government Ethics Commission has tried to remedy that situation is they said, well, it's okay if it's part of a reasonable compensation package. So we're in the process of updating our travel policies for city staff so that we can comply with that. And what we would propose, what the Charter Review Committee has proposed, is that we apply the same principle to city council. Not only just because it's easier, but to keep you all out of trouble to the extent that that's possible.
And if I remember this correctly from what you told me before, this actually brings us in line with every other state employee, even though we're not employees or elected official, but we basically would have the same policy everybody else, which is you can't keep your mind.
And the same policy as the federal government has
Right.
as well. So yes, that's correct.
It'd be very difficult to not have that policy. I mean, I don't know, anybody who has a credit card, you don't get some sort of. I don't even know the reward they get. I just all of a sudden see I have points over here, you know, it's like.
So they did recommend some language on this one. The problem that we were having with remedying and making it the same for city employees versus council is there's a provision in our charter, section 37, that says the mayor and councilors shall not be compensated, but may be reimbursed for actual and reasonable expenses. The language that the Charter Review Committee recommends is the mayor and councilors shall not be compensated, but may be compensated for actual and reasonable expenses in accordance with the city of Sherwood's personnel and travel policies as may be amended from time to time. So as you can see, there was no move, to actually pay city council or pay the mayor any kind of a salary or anything like that. It's merely cleaning it up and aligning it with the Oregon Government Ethics Commission's rules. So we can, like I said, keep everybody out of trouble and keep staff and council on the same page with regard to those travel policies. Because oftentimes you'll travel with the city manager to Washington, D.C. And a lot of the times you're traveling to places with city staff. So that was the recommendation for the first one. Does anybody have any questions about that?
So
the first part says not be compensated and the next part says will be
Yeah, I
compensated.
think we can clean, we were talking, Sebastian and I were talking about that today. That's a little chunky. I think what we could say is the mayor and council shall not be compensated unless for actual and reasonable expenses. So I mean, there's, yeah, certainly we can clean the language up and we'll bring you a recommendation on a resolution if that's the consensus of the council.
I'm in
Yeah.
favor of.
Yeah, but Dan, I would support cleaning it up,
Yeah.
the way you said, but also, I mean, my trip to Washington DC was $100 more expensive for the city because I didn't get the free bag that comes with using my credit card, right? So it's like, it would save money and it would bring us into alignment. Let's just go ahead and do that.
Yeah, I think that's right. So, Kim,
Yeah, no, I'm good with that.
I agree.
okay,
So we can, on that one, go ahead and put together, well, you can go ahead and put together, see, the council has to approve it, it's by a vote, and then Sylvia will work with the county to get it out as a measure. Let's get through all three before we decide when we want to do this.
Sure.
We don't have to do it, in November, we can do it next May, we have options, so. And we might want to combine it with something.
Great. So the second recommendation has to do with our fee schedule and our water, surface water, sewer, and street utility fees. Presently, section 47 of our code prevents the council from raising those rates more than 2% without a vote of our qualified electors. I guess is a good way to put that. So basically what the commission recommended was that council commission a study on this to figure out what does this actually look like for us? Because right now, clean water services, those rates we pass through to customers. But at the same time, you know, for capital expenses and for emergency repair expenses, the 2% that we're allowed to raise hasn't necessarily outpaced or kept track with the inflation. So there's a concern that it puts the city at a disadvantage there. So what the commission has recommended, or the committee has recommended, is that there be a study done on that. So we're not here asking for any movement on that tonight, other than that if there's consensus on the city to go out and study what would be appropriate and what would keep the city sustainable in that regard financially. Does
I
anybody
agree
have
with that.
questions?
I think we need to do a rate study like we do with our water with Deb. Just to,
Big master plan will cover it.
yeah, exactly.
Should cover it. Give us a 5-year window of what the rates need to be sustainable or explore options.
It does seem like it's a trap if it goes up more than we're able to. I mean, that's essentially what it addresses, right? If it goes up more than we're able to increase, then all of a sudden I'm for that as well. Although, you know, is there anything we as a city, I mean, we can't exert any pressure on those above us. I mean, we have limited pressure to say, hey, you know, don't raise the tipping fees, don't raise.
Well, so tipping fees is a different matter. I
Okay,
mean, for pass-through stuff, like
Yeah.
tipping fees and stuff related to that, the charter restriction doesn't apply.
Okay, this is
This,
just,
this is, so for like storm and sewer, there's a clean water service component and there's a city component. So we're just talking about the city.
But the city, the challenge is, the study will help address is there is costs the city must expend to meet contractual requirements of clean water services for maintaining and inspecting the things that we quote unquote own. So
Well, not just
But all-
all services, there's federal standards and state standards that we have to comply with. And it's a basic formula when we're only going up 2% a year and inflation on capital costs is going up 70.
I mean, if the clean water services didn't require us to do everything they do, if they reduced their inspection requirements in half, then it would certainly lower our costs. But they're not about to do that.
yeah. No, and it's hard
I
to
mean, it
argue,
is,
well, and it's hard to argue for clean water and infrastructure and all of that. So I just, my only concern is, I'm fine doing a study on it, and I'm also fine giving us a little more leeway, because I don't think anybody wants to pay taxes, but we also don't want contaminated water and broken infrastructure, so.
Yeah, when this passed, I remember it was a significant portion of the population who voted that election cycle, and with the being on the city council now and seeing the budget and how this 2% is affecting us, I think that having a study done to show the residents what's happening with our funds is necessary for us to adjust this, and so I think this is the right.
I agree, that was kind of my thought too, I mean, we're on a trajectory that eventually we're gonna have funds that are bankrupt and we won't be able to meet our requirements, and at that point, we'd have to do a levy or go begging the state or the federal government, and which is very uncertain, and even with the levy, if you go that route, now you're paying interest on the bond, and you know, it's actually cheaper in the long run to do something like this, but we're not gonna. We have to sell this to the public, so we need to do the study to understand it, get the data. And we may get the data and say, okay, we're okay.
Oh, we know we're not okay, but
We're already borrowed money just to do a recent project.
I
Well,
understand.
that's-
I don't wanna prejudice the study though. I mean, we need to find out exactly what we need and what that looks like. If we're gonna have that conversation.
Yeah, and having the study will give us something to, if it comes that we need 1 to 2% to sustain some of the funds, then we have data to educate the community. Which I don't think was the case years ago.
But do you
I
think,
don't think that was the case.
Nobody was educated.
right, but I mean, do you think, will the public believe it? I mean, do they say, oh, well, city council paid for this study and,
You know what I mean? Let's get the data and then we can talk about next steps.
Okay.
I know what you mean, but.
It's a third-party consultant, it's not ours. We're not doing our own study.
Deb Gallardi is the person that would likely perform the study. She's, if we got on the calendar today, and likely, you know, Keith's exactly right, we would address this through the master planning process, but if we wanted to do it independently, I mean, if we started today, we're 8 months out from a final product on that. So I think addressing it, talking with Craig and Kristen, addressing it through the master plan. Yes, makes more sense.
Even if you do like a capital bond, that's for that project. It doesn't keep the coffers sustainable.
It's one time.
Yeah,
It's also
part of
expensive.
what the master plan should address. Is we've been in a fortunate position in a sense that so much of our sewer water infrastructure is been built in the last 30 years. As that ages, we will get a bigger and bigger chunk of that infrastructure that will be aging and needing more and more attention. So the replacement expense is only going to grow over time because we've really benefited because so much of it's been new. And then lo and behold, Clean Water Services might change their policy again and redesign the stormwater facilities again, which is also unexpected additional expenses. As an example.
Any other questions about that from council?
I think, just to wrap it up, I think that study is a good idea. I think understanding it financially is really important. And with trends and kind of where, you know, we understand where we are in terms of life cycle for a lot of the infrastructure that's in the ground. So this is stuff that can be figured out, calculated, and worked through. I think, I just want to put out the water fund as an example, because, you know, we set in place rates when we did the major upgrades, built the plant in Wilsonville and put the pipe into here. We set rates in such a way back then where that's been very sustainable. I mean, we have, and a lot of people don't know this, with the exception of Tualatin, we have the cheapest water in the area by far, you know, so we paid a little more back then, but now we're reaping the benefits, and we have programmed maintenance and capital projects to maintain that infrastructure out for the next 20 years,
Yeah.
and it's all funded, right? So we're on a good track, so I think.
And we'll find out for sure, because we'll be updating the water master
And
plan.
at that, but we need to get to a similar, my goal is to get to a similar sustainable kind of structure, but also give citizens confidence that they're not just gonna get taken to the clean air someplace. So that's what.
Pending any other further questions, section, or the final recommendation, third recommendation. And I'll just preface it with, we've seen over the last 10 years and really before that, the abrogation of home rule in the state of Oregon. And for citizens that aren't aware of what home rule is, it's the ability of citizens to make laws and promote policy that really is most effective and most impactful to the residents that live there, the local in their city. Yes, correct. And so a lot of times what happens is we have this word called preemption. And so the state can preempt cities from doing certain things. You've seen it with HB 2001. You've seen it with SB 1573, and I won't get into all the details of those, but it applies to land use and a lot of stuff like that. So
Annexation.
correct. So there's a lot of concern there. It's frankly bipartisan because just about every counselor, every leader of a city elected official wants the ability to make a difference for their city. And that's what home rule is about. It allows you to do your job.
And it's written into our state constitution.
That's right. And so with that being said, sorry, my computer decided to go to sleep. So one of the things the Charter Review Committee recommended you take a look at are the references to state law in our code. And so I'm sorry, in our charter. And so what that means is essentially in 2016, I believe, the SB 1537 off the top of my head was passed that basically took the ability away from city councils and required city councils to approve most annexations without the benefit of voters being able to have a say in that. Corvallis, the city of Corvallis and Philomath sued the state. And they said, hey, this is an impingement on home rule. It's inappropriate. You are getting into our process. And the courts came back and said, well, Corvallis and Philomath, look at your charters because there's a provision in your charter that says unless otherwise required by state law, you can't do this. And so that was a problem for Corvallis in the court. And that wasn't the only reason they lost, but that was a part of that reason is because they had in their charter a conflicting provision. So the thought process and the legal reasoning behind it was, look, if you say in a court, unless otherwise required by state law, then the legislature has some authority to come in there and make those changes. And if they make those changes and your charter has that language in there, it's problematic. So that was 2016 is when that lawsuit started. The Court of Appeals made that ruling in 2020. We have an identical provision to that in section 3 of our charter where it refers to boundaries, where it says unless required by state law, annexations may only take effect with the approval of city voters. So whether that's a moot point or not at this point is sort of beside the point, right? Because courts can change, common law can change. So the question that we have for you is, would you like to go through our code? Do we have, I'm sorry, I keep saying code, go through our charter and look at references to state law and remove the ones that may not be beneficial to have in there from that perspective.
And if I understood our conversation earlier today, there's some provisions that are actually granting this power, right? So we don't want to mess with those, but there's others that, I don't know what the potential preemption that could come down the road. But if we can get rid of those references, we at least have some legal basis to challenge it down the road if it comes about. That's kind of how I think about it.
So let me ask this, so if we do not remove those, does that mean we can't sue? I mean, you said that's one of the reasons they lost, but if we say, hey, that, with the housing stuff that we joined with a bunch of other cities on, are we not able to do that?
No, it does not prevent you from suing if you don't take any action. The impetus behind this and the recommendation is in litigation, you want to preserve every argument you possibly can. And so what we don't want to do is just give away arguments for the sake of giving them away. Is that clear?
That's kind of how I think about it. And, frankly, Corvallis gave the judge an easy way out because they had that written into the charter. So we have other sections in our charter, like around, what was the one we talked about today?
Well, yeah, we can walk through some of it. There's about 15 references, and not all of them, in my opinion, should come out because, as the mayor mentioned, they actually grant us authority, and we don't want to give away authority, right? So, the first one was section 3 boundaries. That was appropriate. Powers, construction. The powers and construction references to state law grant us the authority, so we wouldn't want to mess with those. for instance, section 14 has to do with records. A record of council meetings must be kept in a manner prescribed by council rules in Oregon public records and meetings laws. That is an area that's already very regulated and it's preempted significantly. So I'm not sure, we could discuss the policy behind that, but I'm not sure that any change would be helpful there. That's already preempted. As far as city elections must conform to state law, except as this charter or ordinance provides otherwise. I also feel similarly about that. I mean, I think there's arguments from that could be made, but if the elections are preempted for the most part by the state, then there's not going to be a lot of wiggle room there. However, they're not all preempted. We could have a municipal election if we chose to have a municipal election. I'm not aware of any time that we've done that on our own schedule, but there's nothing that says we can't.
I think that an example, I mean, we could boil the ocean and try to figure out every possible, preemption they can come with, which I don't think is useful. I think this is just more about just taking the obvious ones out of there. But an example, and this is purely hypothetical, I don't know if they're working on this. I don't think they are. But, they could decide that city courts must start hearing civil suits for less than $10,000, which usually per year goes to the county. We would probably say, well, wait a second, that's an unfunded mandate. We can't afford to do that. So I think, there are potential things in there that we could potentially protect ourselves from, or at least give us better standing.
That's
have
right.
that conversation.
And I do also want to point out, I don't see a lot of risk right now to where we're at. The whole point of this is we're thinking about what that looks like in the future, if that makes sense. So those are some of them. There's Tim just brought up, or the mayor just brought up the municipal court and judge, where it says that all proceedings of the court need to conform to the state laws governing justices of the peace and justice courts. That might be a little bit outdated. There's actually a section, ORS 221, that actually references municipal courts and sets the guidelines for them. So I'm not sure if that's just an outdated provision or code or why that is. Sebastian and I had a long conversation about it. My recommendation with this is before we make a decision on the municipal court judge, I would want our municipal court judge to be able to weigh in on that and give his input as well. He's an employee of council. So I do think that would be important. So I wanted to bring that up because the charter review committee thought it was important that you hear some of this. And so that's what I have for it.
So for tonight, I guess the question for council in terms of direction is there general agreement? We need to review this and then Ryan can come back with a recommendation.
I'm willing to hear more.
Yeah, there's a reason why these were put in here at one point.
Well, I can, and I don't want to.
So for context, the current city charter was taken based on a former League of Oregon City model charter, in which they incorporated some uniquenesses of things in this previous Sherwood City charter. But that's where most of that language comes from. The current League of Oregon Cities advice to cities is not to have these references like we have now.
I think it's an artifact from an era we didn't agree about this stuff. Okay, that's right. That makes sense.
Yeah, first, I'm never opposed to learning more, so I'd like to see which ones would be recommended, and then I also, if they're not serving a purpose except to limit us from having rule over, ourselves as a community, then I see it as just kind of extra superfluous language, and so but let's take a look at them because I'm always.
We want to see the detail.
Yeah, I want to see the details, but I'm also in favor of fewer words. So.
On the previous one, yeah, no, I'm the same with that as well. I was just wondering on the Article 47, do we have to give any direction or we already know we're doing the master planning, so we're gonna get that studied anyways?
No direction needed.
I think the direction is staff understands that financial study of what capital we need and what rate structures could look like.
Okay.
Well, that concludes the recommendations of the charter committee. They stand in recess pending any further direction from council if you have any. But we appreciate their service and their recommendations for sure. So with that being said, I will, we do have some dates that the council has some this year with respect to the section 37 language that could be put on the November ballot if you chose to do that. Or it could be, you know, we come back at a later time to the extent that there's some other changes that need to be made, we can put it on a different ballot, so.
Is the November one our most reasonably cost one?
It's-
To vote on? Zero cost on the November one.
And we're not gonna have the other study done, and we may not have the recommendations.
Studies, it's gonna be forever.
Yeah, so I'm also kind of opposed to putting three of them on at the same time, just because I feel like.
Too.
Right, but I also, these three are all, that, the first one seems like a very easy one to explain. The second two feel like they need a little bit more. Anyway, so just from a marketing standpoint, it feels like I wouldn't want to combine them. But
And we're not in a rush. I don't think I need this.
yeah, because I would like the first one to go through as soon as possible. I mean, it pained me that I was spending $100 more of the city's money that I didn't have to because I had to use my debit card versus a credit card. Right, so.
It's not a fun call for a lawyer to make, you know.
It's also not fun to get down to a conference where the city has made the reservations and we assume it's on the city's credit card. And they said, well, you have to bring the city's credit card with you.
Yeah.
And then have to put it on ours.
Yeah.
All right, so you'll come back with a recommendation on the first one. The other two will table for now.
Maybe I'll get a resolution on the first one,
A resolution, yeah.
to place it on the ballot.
I don't know.
On the November ballot, is that what I'm hearing?
I don't think since that one's free.
I would
Yeah.
make that target unless council votes to give you different direction.
I think that makes sense. And it's 6:59 PM. We hit the spell right on the.
All right,
Sounds
Keith.
I do what I can.
All right, we are adjourned from the work session. Let's start in 7.
Yes.
I was like, don't do that.